In this session, we'll be covering the many new features found in Visual 11. Let's start by looking at some of the database administration changes, such as adding new users, some security measures, and other database maintenance items. When adding new users, you now have a summary in the lower right-hand corner of the dialog that indicates the number of users you're licensed for, how many users have been added to the system, the number of users that are visual users. That means that the visual column is checked on. How many other users have been added to the systems. That generally means a CRM user or a shop floor only user. How many users are logged into the system currently, and if you're a named user license, how many users remain to be assigned. When a new user is added to the visual database, the security setting for that user for both menu options and all application programs will now be set to no. Previously, when adding a new user, both options were granted full access. They've been changed to no to further tighten down on security measures so that you don't mistakenly give a user permission to something that wasn't deliberately intended to be given to them. For those companies that utilize single sign-on and need additional special characters added to the visual user ID, those special characters have been increased in Visual 11. The preferred vendor has been added to the reset part information dialog, allowing users to reset the preferred vendor on quote master, engineering master, and work order master material requirement cards so that it reflects the current preferred vendor for a given part or a range of parts where the preferred vendor has recently been changed. A date field has been added to the customer and vendor file that indicates the last time the active status flag has been changed on either the customer or the vendor. For those customers that have a large number of ship to addresses, a sequence number has been added to the shipping address dialog, allowing you to set your preferred or most commonly used shipping addresses to the top of the list in the sequence that you would like them to be displayed. In customer order entry, the contact email address has been increased from 50 characters to 100 characters. This includes all other tables where the email address was 50 characters. Those tables as well have been set to 100 characters in length. The part and part site table now has a new column that tracks who last changed data in the associated part or part site table. That information can easily be obtained through either auditing or by writing a simple query in the query tool and adding that query to the toolbar inside of part maintenance or any other application that you wish to see this information. Manual shop floor installation process has been replaced by a fully automated shop floor install. This installation will first verify that you have all of the required IIS prerequisites set in IIS, and then from there, the ability to install new, upgrade in an existing installation of shop floor, or uninstall shop floor. The purchase order from the customer order is now made available on the shipping notification as a token to the header section of that notification. To improve ease of use, the video library has now been categorized by functional area, such as admin, engineering, manufacturing, shop floor, inventory, etc., for easy lookup of videos associated with that functional area of the visual solution. And for those companies that have multiple instances of shop floor running against a series of databases, you can now determine which database you are connected to by going to the help about in shop floor. Also in Visual 11, you can set color themes. So you could also utilize a color theme based on the database that you're connected to. Now let's take a look at some of the enhancements that we made to the financial side of the visual system. To prevent users from entering wrong consumable expense accounts on a PO line, a default consumable account has been set, can now be set on the part or the product code, automating this process. The hierarchy that's used when determining which consumable account to use, it would start by looking at the part. If there's a consumable account there, it'll use that account. If not, it will then look at the product code assigned to that part. If there's nothing there, then it will go to current behavior, which will prompt the user at PO entry time to specify a GL account ID to be used for that line item. Credit card and wire types have been added to both accounts payable payment entry as well as accounts receivable cash receipts. For payables, these payment types will adhere to current check processing rules, where you can specify the payment type on a vendor and then group and process those types through the standard pay runs. On the receivable side, it's more of a note or an indication that payment from that customer was received via a credit card or a wire transfer. Prevent any activity against a bank account that is no longer used, you can now set a bank account to an inactive status. You can only change a bank account to an inactive status once all activity that has been entered into the system has been posted to the general ledger. The part ID has been added to the sales invoice screen in the reference section, the reference column. This is a concatenated field where it will now have both the part ID and the part description. Note that historical invoices will still only reference the description of what was entered when the invoice was entered. The part will only be added to this reference field for invoices going forward. For those companies that use progress billing, you can now place the milestone description of each billing on the invoices that go out. You would need to go in using Report Builder, go into the QRP for the invoice form that you use, and add this new input item wherever you'd like it to be positioned on the invoice. The VAT exempt flag has been added to the shipping address, so now VAX exempt can be brought down to the destination point of the shipment. For those using credit limit checking, previously the solution only included the cost of the product or the price of the product being sold. This new option allows you to include tax when doing a credit limit check. This is available. It happens at both time at order entry time and when it redoes a credit check at shipping. It will also allow or include tax if you've set the preference for inclusion of tax. You can now set a discount basis on your terms. Currently, prior to Visual 11, your discount allowed would be based on the full amount of that invoice, which would include goods, freight, and tax. You can now set that basis just on goods plus freight, or the current process or method, which is goods, freight, and tax. And when taking discounts in cash application, there are now 2 additional columns that show you what that terms basis are for discount allowed. And to prevent use of indirect labor codes, you can now set your indirect labor codes to inactive. Let's take a look at the Visual 11 scheduling enhancements. A new scheduler logging preference was added to eliminate the accumulation of unwanted log files, which required manual deletion or the creation of a Windows service to automatically delete these files. In Visual 11, the date stamp on the log file can be eliminated, which results in the replacement of the scheduler log rather than an accumulation of these logs. A scheduler preference was also added to preserve frozen operations where the start date of the frozen operation is prior to the next schedule start date. Previously, frozen operations with a start date prior to the scheduled date would be unfrozen, potentially resulting in an undesirable result. For example, let's say you have a job on a machine that will run for the next 4 days, and therefore you freeze that operation to force the scheduler to schedule all other operations after it. Unfortunately, previously the schedule would unfreeze the operation, suggesting that it can't possibly be started prior to today or the next scheduler date, often resulting in new jobs being placed ahead of it. Preference set, the operation will remain frozen in place until completed or deliberately unfrozen. Note that the unfrozen operation will extend across the scheduled start date, preserving the start date of the operation, as well as giving you an estimate of when the operation will be completed. The accuracy of the remaining time and hence schedule makes the assumption that the estimated run rates are fairly accurate and you are closely producing and reporting to those rates. At the site level, you can now elect to prioritize and freeze operations in place at a resource, with all remaining operations being scheduled after the prioritized operations. For example, let's say you have an emergency order for one of your most important customers. Therefore, you want to move an operation or series of operations ahead of others, making sure they are worked on first. With this new feature, prioritized operations can be set at the resource level within Visual Shop Floor, directly driving accuracy and priority for when the visual scheduler is next run. In other words, not only can you prioritize entire work orders within the scheduler run, you can now prioritize individual operations at the machine level to account for priorities that the visual scheduler would not otherwise know of, such as a rush order, you have a problem with a fixture, maybe some defective materials, etc. where therefore you need to shuffle or tweak the output of the scheduler to be in line with what's really taking place on the shop floor. Note that if this new preference is not activated, previous shop floor dispatching functionality will be adhered to, where dispatching is only a visual sequencing of the operations at the resource inside of shop floor, not an actual prioritization and freezing of those operations, whereby affecting the scheduler output. So based on this new operation prioritization just described, the visual scheduler window will display the priority operations as frozen in blue with a dispatch sequence that corresponds to the priority that you established inside of Visual Shop Floor. If a prioritized operation has a concurrent resource dependency, those dependencies will also be highlighted in blue with a dispatch sequence preferenced with a CR, indicating it's a concurrent resource of an operation that has been given a priority. All priority operations can be viewed within the scheduling window by selecting the Frozen Operations dialog, filtering out frozen operations that are not priorities set on the shop floor using Visual Shop Floor. Also new in Visual 11 is the concept of a what-if work order, which allows work orders with an unreleased status to be included in the visual scheduling run to help predict future capacity needs should the unexpected new business be won. Setting up is a simple three-step process. First, at the site level, specify that what-if work orders are allowed within the site. Secondly, click the what-if checkbox on the work order header card indicating that this job is a what-if job. You can also enter a win probability to select which work orders you want to include in the next scheduler run. Note that the what-if checkbox is only available for selection if all material and operation cards are in an unreleased status on that work order. The final step of the process is to run the visual concurrent scheduler and selecting to include what-if work orders. You can also select a probability percentage filler to only include the new business that is most probable. For example, only include everything that I have a 90% chance of winning. If you leave the probability field blank, all what-if work orders will be included in the scheduling run. In the scheduling window, what-if work order capacity will appear as green on the Gantt chart as shown in the bottom image. Different shades of green are used for frozen operations, late operations, etc. if it's involving a what-if work order. To review the effects of what-if work orders on capacity, the Resource Utilization Report has a new option to show or include what-if work orders in the utilization projections and schedule comparisons. From the Resource Utilization Report, you can now export the entire schedule to Excel, allowing you to create your own pivot tables to analyze capacity needs by either resource, groups, or departments. Now that we've looked at the Visual Scheduler enhancements, let's take a look at the Visual 11 Shop Floor enhancement. Technology adoption is a major component of the Visual 11 release. First, the previous API framework has been replaced with a new REST API layer. Secondly, the Infor design system components were adopted for greater ease of use and consistent user experience across Infor solutions. For example, you'll notice a new home page with the menu system down the left side of the form and the ability to establish home page menu widgets. Over time, the home page will be expanded to contain shop floor related analytics and extensibility features. In addition to the changes, the application, you can now establish application color and contrast themes that can be set to better enhance your overall user experience. As you'll see, noticeable changes have been made to the grids. Users can now rearrange the columns, sort across multiple columns, and easily configure the columns that appear on the grids. Grid rows and columns contain borders for a clearer presentation of the data. These changes significantly improve the overall user experience of the resource schedule. The smart device camera can now be used to scan work order, operation, and material requirement barcodes, where scanning in greater distance is no longer required. Dispatch sequencing can now be limited to selected rows. Previously, all the rows within the retrieved collection of data were assigned a sequence number. In addition, based on the new freeze prioritized operation preference previously discussed with the scheduling enhancements, selected operations will be prioritized and frozen, directly contributing to the visual scheduler accuracy if this new preference is activated. If you recall, operations that are prioritized in shop floor will appear as frozen operations within the scheduling window, with a dispatch sequence indicating the order of priority established on the shop floor. The scheduling window functionality used to offload work orders from one resource to another is now available in shop floor, aligning the scheduler to what is dynamically taking place on the shop floor. For example, the work order operation might recommend machine X, but machine Y is open and can process the operation sooner. As you can see, an additional operation status flag has been added to indicate a frozen operation. If the operation has a dispatch sequence or priority, this indicates it's been given a priority on the shop floor. A frozen operation without a dispatch sequence is a traditional frozen operation without a priority. Open operations can now be administratively closed by users with the proper authorization. Open operations that should be closed generally fall into three categories. First, the operation closure is based upon actual hours versus estimated hours, where the job has come in under estimate. Secondly, maybe an open operation whose yield was not as expected, did not produce as many as anticipated. And thirdly, to clean up mistakes made out on the shop floor where operations were not properly closed. The result is that users no longer need to go to the manufacturing window to make these simple cleanup entries. For companies that will include the new what-if scheduling predictions in the standard production schedule, those operations can be included or excluded from the resource schedule view. Please note that what-if operations will consume capacity. Therefore, only under unique situations should what-if work orders be included in the production schedule. For example, you may want to reserve this capacity for a custom order that you know will be coming within the near term. That might be an example of when you would include what-if work orders within the standard production schedule. For companies that always want to see the started operations at the top of the resource schedule, regardless of the visual scheduler output, a new shop floor preference has been added to display started operations first. A started operation is any released operation that has a labor ticket reported against it. The work order priority rank has been included as a resource schedule grid option for those companies that often use the global scheduler's work order prioritization to help drive the scheduling output. Let's look at some of the changes made to the core visual solution in version 11. Customer maintenance, a purchase order required setting has been added to enforce the entry of a purchase order before a sales order can be saved, helping to support overall business processes or to ensure this information is collected from those customers where a PO is required. Customer and part ID are now passed to the selling history dialog to simplify retrieval of previous selling prices. The part or customer can then be removed to widen the historical view of pricing. For those companies that utilize Visual's customer and part pricing functionality, all pricing can now be retrieved to a grid format or for simplified editing, or you can export to Excel, making mass modifications and additions and importing back into Visual, making global pricing updates much easier. The previous FOB label has been changed to shipping terms throughout Visual to clarify the information being requested at this data entry point. Part inventory locations can now be made inactive. To make inactive, the part location must have a 0 on-hand balance and cannot be a default location, such as the primary, inspection, transfer, or auto issue locations. Locations can be made inactive at the warehouse level if each part referring to that location meets these criteria. Please note that if inventory is discovered for a part at an inactive location during a physical inventory count, that quantity will be recorded against that inactive location. For this reason, a new option has been added to the physical inventory feature to display all inactive locations with an on-hand quantity. Under normal operating conditions, you should not have an inactive part location with an on-hand quantity. PO promise delivery and ship dates are now available as optional columns to the material planning window standard inventory netting view. The work order base ID filter has been added to the labor ticket search window to extend the search beyond date and employee. Accounts payable invoice and vendor are now displayed on the work order cost screen for invoices posted directly to the job. Both are drill to options, opening the referenced invoice or vendor upon selection. The shipper waybill number has been increased from 20 to 30 characters in support of tracking numbers exceeding the previous limitation. When the purchasing preference is set to update the vendor quoted price from the new price entered on the PO line, the quote effective and quote date will be updated to reflect the new date, which is generally the day you entered the purchase order. Additional identifiers have been added to the purchasing RFQ file attachments for clarity when issuing an RFQ to more than one supplier. Previously, there was no mention of the RFQ number.